Hello, Michael.
Hello, how you doing?
I am doing quite well, quite well. We're enjoying some nice, dreary fall weather here in San Francisco. Where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, I am outside Charlottesville, Virginia, and it's raining here as well. So it's gloomy here also.
The price we pay for fall. Uh,
Yeah,
well, welcome, audience. It is wonderful to see you all streaming in. If you could let us know, just do me a favor and drop in the chat that you can see us and hear us if you, in fact, are able to. And maybe let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always fun to see the geographic distribution of our audience members here today. Um, I'm really looking forward to today's event. I was just chatting with Michael. I am a newbie to the field of animation in terms of really having insight to how much work it takes to create even small pieces of animated content. But I'm such a huge fan of the art and the discipline, and I'm really excited to chat with you today, Michael, as somebody who has a tremendous amount of experience, not just in both 2D and 3D animation, but also in building accessible pathways for other people to get into it. It blows my mind. I don't know how folks get into animation other than, people who are really into drawing and find that pathway. But I imagine there are lots of other paths.
yeah.
And curious
Mostly,
to know.
mostly you flunk out of college, so then you have to do animation. You have to learn a digital skill.
Got to develop the digital skill.
Yeah. But thank you. No, thank you for the introduction. Thank you so much to the Discover team for asking me to come and talk with you all about animation. And animation is absolutely a fantastic, discipline and line of work. And I'm incredibly grateful to have, been a part of many people learning how to do animation and getting to see just the magical quality that there is when you take a bunch of still images and hit play, and there's that level of excitement in it. So, I run a company called Mograph Mentor, and that's what Ashley's referencing in terms of accessible pathways. And I find so many people come to animation through all kinds of channels now. People coming from traditional graphic design, where it feels like the next step to do that. People who studied illustration really deeply, and
Mm-hmm.
so then it makes sense to draw several pictures in a progression. So it like leads a lot of people from that way as well. People who come from video editing and film, who have a great sense of timing and they have stories to tell, and so they want to learn animation to, continue their work as filmmakers. And so, Mograph Mentor has really served all kinds of, professionals, right? Most of what we do is continuing education. Most of the people we work with are adults who are, pivoting or adding skills, upskilling, all those kind of things. So just an incredible time in the world where we can work with people all over the world. We've, been fortunate enough to work with people in 70 different countries, which is just insane, right? Because it's not like we're super smart. It's like, oh, PayPal and Dropbox and Teachable and Discover and all these platforms, and then there it is. So it's like,
Makes it possible.
what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. And it's also kind of especially I don't know, relevant for the art of animation, one of the powers of which is this kind of universal capacity for storytelling, regardless of somebody's geographic location or native language or demographic or what have you. There's animation has the power to kind of cut across a lot of those things and create space for people to connect on very kind of deep emotional levels in ways that sometimes live content can't. So I love what you're observing about being able to connect with students and learners from all over the world who are kind of building this discipline, because it's kind of like just this sort of universal language, even though there are obviously different styles and manifestations of it. I have always loved watching animations created by artists in different countries and just kind of like letting that emotion just
Sure.
letting you feel your feelings, you know?
Sure. It's so true. I mean, it doesn't fail, right? Everyone has a story to tell. Everybody has a perspective. And, you know, that's what leads, you know, animation pulls people in, and then it's character design and background painting and visual development and all the, and so much of people's willingness to go through the pain of learning those things, because there's such a curve on really trying to master those hard disciplines that people spend years, you know, trying to study, is they do want to tell stories. They want to make worlds, and they have something to say. So I totally agree. That's just like a universal thing that really emerges when you're in the arts, for sure. And people have that chance to, you know, apply their creativity and express themselves.
Yeah. And in a way that can potentially reach, you know, reach more hearts than maybe a written word or what have you, which is really neat. So we're gonna go ahead and dive into today's content. I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about the tools that you're going to walk us through today. So we're going to be looking at sort of like cutting across 2D and 3D animation. I just a couple of notes to our audience. There will be a replay available of today's session. So if you come in late, or you know, if there's some nuggets of wisdom that Michael shares that you want to be sure and capture, you'll be able to replay this. We'll send it out via email, and then you'll also be able to access it through the YouTube link. Speaking of which, the course that Michael and his team are talking through today is part of a package of mentorship opportunities and varying levels of participation. Like they have lots of different content, some of which might be if you want to just dive a little bit deeper into what we talk about today, they've got options for you there. Or if you want to go sort of whole hog and really immerse yourself in the tools and the skills that Michael's going to introduce us to today, you can access all of that from the link that's pinned to the top of the YouTube stream. And then I'll continue to drop it in the chat as well. I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that you want to talk to Michael about, he's going to do some demos and some orientation around some different tools and that kind of thing. Just drop that in the chat, and I can make sure that we talk about it. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. Do we know? Are there people attending right now?
Yeah. We've got folks in the stream.
Okay.
We are live.
Good to know. I know there's a lot of content out there. I know there's a lot of streaming. So thank you for hanging out.
Yes, thank you for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, but thank you so much for the introduction. And yeah, so, you know, in talking a little bit about animation and just the fundamental principle of it, it really cuts across 2D and 3D. So when we say mastering animation in 2D and 3D, we really just kind of mean mastering animation. But I want to display, you know, what that looks like in the pieces of software you'd be most likely to use if you were actually just diving into this. So let me just come back to that other part. So my name is Michael Jones. I'm an animator and artist living in Virginia. I'm currently, you know, streaming to you from this backyard, recently completed backyard office, which is technically a shed, if anyone from the county asks you about it. And so I've been working from home, doing freelance work for, you know, a number of years, as well as running Mograph Mentor. And here is the front page of Mograph Mentor. And as Ashley was saying, we offer mentorships, and then we offer an on-demand library of training for $29 a month. So if you're just looking for technical training, you can just jump into there. So the goal of what I want to go through with these examples is number one, to teach you this basic concept behind animation. I think if you can, understand the very core concept of spacing, and then number two, how that software translates this idea of spacing. So we're going to cover how software does that, the most popular pieces of software. And then we're going to look at some examples of these animation concepts in action. So let's just dive right into really this basic concept. And if you can understand this, then you will have definitely gotten your money's worth for coming to the stream today, because this is really it, right? This is basically these kind of three spacing patterns that animators repeat in their work over and over. They repeat it in their work and they combine it in their work. So what are we looking at here? Pay close attention to these lines here, these spacing lines. Each of these little hand-drawn animations that I did is actually spaced out along each of these lines. So what do we see? When the lines are close together, the ball appears to be moving slower. When the lines are further apart, it appears to be moving faster. So that contrast in speed, where things are moving slow or things are moving fast, is really the essence of animation. It's really what animators do to translate, whether it's graphic design driven work that we're working with, or it's more character driven work, or even things like this, where you're just actually hand drawing a little animation. The placement of each of those still images is really what determines the nature of an animation. So if you can understand this concept, then you essentially understand the game that animators are playing, that we're kind of doing over and over. And as long as I've been teaching and talking about animation, this is really the way that I can most distill it down for people who want to get into animation. If they want to apply animation because they want to do motion design, or they want to apply it into their, into your user experience, user interface kind of work, then this is really where you want to start, right? Is this idea of spacing. So on the very far left here, we have a spacing type that I'm calling smash into. It's like smashing into something. And so we see the frames here to start are close together. And we call this like an ease out. It's easing out, and then it's moving really quickly. And so this happens when you want to really show the velocity of something, when you want to show impact, when you want to show something building up inertia and then crashing into something else, then your spacing is going to look like this, right? So the intent of what we want to do with this animation really dictates how we're going to space this out. Here in the middle, where it says ease in, ease out, this is really the most common animation spacing that we do, right? So we said 99% of what animators do is literally doing these types of spacing right here over and over and in different combinations. Inside of that, probably 90% of what animators do lives right here with this ease in, ease out, right? So an animation that's easing into something, it goes fast through the center. So we see this spacing in the middle where the frames are further apart, and then it eases on this end here where these are closer together. So this ease in, ease out, getting this snappy through the center kind of motion, that is, what animators basically do over and over again, right? Whether it's hand-drawn animation, or as we're going to see here, it's more procedural, and you're doing computer animation with After Effects and Cinema 4D. And then finally, this where we're looking at a jump, where something moves really quickly to start, right? So it's going to jump off the ground and then ease at the top of its arc, right? At the top of its jump. And so we see these frames are close together at the top and they are far apart at the bottom. So you really can't belabor, this chart enough when it comes to teaching new people how to do animation, right? If you can understand, if at this point you're saying, yes, I absolutely 100% get this, then you basically understand animation enough to really do good work in a piece of software. And so we're going to look at how that goes. So, animation is an awesome art form, but it's really, the idea of moving images goes back a really long way. But as a commercial art, the industry of animation is really only about 100 years old, right? Early 20th century. Outside of experimental stuff, we have the Disney Corporation doing all these beautiful hand-drawn animated films where they really developed this art form. And so the way that it was done, until about 15, 20 years ago, was to actually just draw out every single frame, right? So every single frame is its own illustration. It means everything that an animator puts on screen has to be created by hand, right? There wasn't a computer to do that. Today, the way animation is done is animators spend their time looking at this right here, looking at these graphs and looking at these lines and looking at these curves and looking at these Bezier handles. So this is the way that modern computer animation is done. So if you can wrap your mind around this core concept of understanding frames close together slow, frames far apart fast, and then you can understand this next piece here, which is these curves and how it relates to these curves, then you're basically ready to go. So that's what we're going to talk a lot about. Now, the three pieces of software that we're going to look at today are Adobe After Effects, Maxon Cinema 4D, and Adobe Animate to look at some traditional animation as well. So in the first example, we're going to look at an animation in After Effects and talk about this concept of spacing and talk about what the computer is doing, right? And so this is actually a great image to just help define what Adobe After Effects wants to do. What Adobe wants to do is to have two key positions that we call keyframes of our main pieces of artwork, our main objects, and then the computer is going to fill in the in-between spacing. Right. So in the way that a traditional animator would have had to draw every single one of these in-between frames, now a computer basically wants to fill in that middle. And this is really the core idea. And so when we go into Adobe After Effects and we actually animate something, you're going to see all these dots. You're going to see this dotted pattern. And that is actually a spacing chart. The computer is telling us, okay, your first frame is here, your second frame is here, and I'm going to fill in all the in-between frames, right? So whereas if you wanted to do this animation at Disney and you were really going to draw that out, the computer is now going to fill in literally 90% of the work, right? Like it's going to do all that in-betweening, and then we're going to have a real-time ability to tweak this spacing chart using these curves here, right? Using these graph editor curves. And, for as long as I've been teaching people to get into animation, this can be the area that's a little bit tricky because it can be a little bit counterintuitive. But once you can just wrap your mind around it, it's actually pretty simple, and it goes across Adobe After Effects, and it goes into, even modern web browser animation type of work. Just this idea of speed graphs or velocity graphs is becoming a ubiquitous idea about interpolating animation, about filling in between spacing. And so we're going to talk about what we're actually seeing here when we get into Adobe After Effects. I also then want to show you an example of how these very basic ideas of these really basic spacing also translates into more complex stuff like 3D character animation in Cinema 4D, where there's a lot more buttons to press, and there's a lot more to know about the software, but the same little spacing idea from that original chart is what drives this kind of work as well, right? Like things like arcs and spacing. So even things that are complicated and 3D really just come back to the same core principle that animators have to learn when they're first starting out. And then we're going to wrap it up with an example of some actually hand-drawn animation in Adobe Animate, because really the traditional animation, it's not gone, it's not dead, it's another tool in the tool belt where you can get a really specific kind of production art out of doing traditional animation. But again, the important thing there is just to understand those basic ideas of animation, right? Frames together, slow, frames further apart, fast, and be able to give, this contrast and dynamic timing that really animators get paid. Our role is to bring that into the production, is really understand the dynamics of movement and motion. So let's jump into Adobe After Effects and talk about this first example here. And I've already got some keyframe data on each of these frames, but for now, I'm actually going to turn off some of these other layers here, define a work area. I'm going to turn this echo effect off, and we're going to take a look. So here we are inside of After Effects. We've got a layer with some keyframes, and you see these two little dots right here. I've set some keyframes, and by default, the in-between spaces are linear. So linear means they're exactly spaced. They're like perfectly spaced. Each one is equal distance to the next. So it's a totally linear spacing. It doesn't match what we just talked about in the chart of easing in or easing out. Turn off the title safe. It's just purely linear. And hopefully you can see it on the stream, but it's these small dots right here that are showing us that this is in fact a linear animation. And so when we watch the playback, we see it doesn't ease out, it doesn't ease into the animation or ease out. It just literally moves at the same distance. It starts on a dime, stops on a dime, and it's the same rate of change in between. And that's not a very good looking animation. I'm actually just going to make these a little bit longer, since there's probably some strobing on the playback of the stream. So a linear animation is what we want to avoid, right? If an animator gets paid to not do a linear animation, because PowerPoint can do a linear animation, right? Like just a basic piece of software can kind of do that for you. It's our job to apply those animation concepts to this work. So let's come down to this next layer here, and let's take a look at its animation. So it actually is doing an ease in, ease out. And we can see that the timing is the same, right? They're both a 2-second animation, but because I have a slight ease, and if we take a look at our graph editor here, we can see that there's actually more frames closer together at the beginning, just like we said. So it's moving slower. It's easing out of that first pose. It's going faster through the center where the gaps get wider. And then we can see that these are closer together here. Now, learning After Effects is really about learning to manipulate these lines over and over and over again, right? This is a really big part of using Adobe After Effects, is creating an animation and then coming in here and making these adjustments in the graph editor curve. So if I grab one of these Bezier handles and start pulling it in, we're actually going to watch that dot chart on the line adjust in real time. We're going to see it move like an accordion, or it's going to kind of space out. And so now, with our knowledge of animation, we should just be able to look at the distribution of these dots and basically know, before I hit play, exactly what kind of animation we're going to see. It's going to be kind of slow, but not very slow. Then it's going to be really fast right here. And then it's going to go really slow at the end, because all these dots are super close together. So if we hit play, that's what we're going to see, right? It's like kind of slow, fast, and then easing in to that final pose. If I come in here and grab this Bezier handle on the first keyframe, we're going to see even more extreme. We should be able to look at the distribution of these dots and know what we're going to see, right? These are very far apart. These are very close together. So it's going to be basically a jump pattern, right? It's going to go fast out of this first position and then ease into that second position. So it's almost like it's being shot out of a cannon. That we were calling a kind of jump, where it's fast out and then it eases in to that next pose. So likewise, if we wanted to create a smash animation, we could actually just do the opposite, where now I'm going to ease this side. So I'm going to watch all those dots start getting close together on the left side. And then I'm going to pull this end and say that I want to end with peak velocity. So this really brings us to the kind of essence of the speed graph, or the velocity graph, as it's called. And over here on the left-hand side of the panel, we see it says 1500 pixels per second, 1000 pixels per second. It's basically like a speed indicator. And so we're gradiating the speed. So as this line is closer to the bottom, it's moving slower. As this peak gets higher to the top, it's moving faster. It corresponds with this y-axis over here, this information here, where it says 1500 pixels per second. So we're going slow, and then it's going to go really, really fast, and then essentially stop on a dime, right? Because the animation ends. There's no more animation data there. So we see really, really slow, and then it moves quickly at the end. And so animators are essentially spending all their time working with this framework, right? We're working with setting keyframes, setting the position, whether we're designing art or we're working with designers, and then we are bringing it to life. We're making it move around Adobe After Effects by setting keyframes and then thinking about the distribution of the spacing, right? Is it something that's going to ease in, ease out? Is it something that's jumping? Is it something that's smashing into another object? And we're basically kind of repeating this over and over. And as we said, the ease in, ease out is kind of like, 90% of that. And so let's actually just do a more classic ease in, ease out, where the peak of the velocity is in the middle of the animation. And so again, we can look at the distribution of these dots and see, we know it's going to be slow, fast through the middle, and then slow on this end here. And so we get something, hopefully, that looks snappy and nice, and isn't just a really boring linear animation, right? If we turn on the linear animation again, we can see if I'm looking at somebody's animation, whether it's in a website, an app, a video, whatever it is, and I see something move like that, I would say, well, that linear animation doesn't look very good. But when we see a little bit of that ease in, ease out, it mirrors what we see in the physical world, which is that things can't just get to their peak velocity on a dime, right? Things need to build up inertia. And likewise, things can't really stop on a dime unless they're being, unless it runs into something. So things naturally do slow down in the world. So this whole ease in, ease out really just kind of matches all of, the movement in the world. And that's why linear animation is basically what we're always trying to avoid, right? There's no context really where we're going to have a linear animation. We're going to have an animation that looks smooth and looks good. And even that description of smooth is really about that contrast, that there are that there's a change in speed. There are slow moments and fast moments. And that is ultimately what makes an animation interesting to us. So we go back to this chart here. It really does rest on this spacing, right? This is how we make animation interesting, is by playing with the spacing. And we do that by manipulating these curves. And again, I know I went over it quickly. Once you can wrap your mind around this idea, whether you're doing web animation or you're doing motion graphics animation, this whole velocity per second idea is the basic idea. So we can look at this curve and know what the animation is going to look like. Eased really, really fast, and eased on the other end, right? We could see here, slow, 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 fast, and, smash into, because there's no more animation data, and stop on a dime, right? This is just the default easy ease. And, I put this in here also to say this is also the job of the animator is to move past the default easy ease and to try to push it and to make it more interesting on a case by case basis of exactly where you should ease it and how, you know, how extreme you should be. But even the default kind of easy ease isn't really the greatest. So let's go ahead and take a look at this example here of just a fun little 3D rig doing a skateboard jump. And this is a rig that me and my buddy and I put together that you can get for free on mographmentor.com if you want to ever play around with a Cinema 4D character rig. But you can see already, hopefully, you know, we've been talking a lot about this kind of spacing. He basically does kind of a jump, right? He's on the skateboard, goes up really quick, hangs at the top of that jump, and then smashes down and then kind of comes back down hard. So that jump spacing is really the basic idea of this entire animation. And, you know, the rest of what's going on in terms of the camera movement, and if we actually come out of the camera here, I'm using this wicked wide angle lens, super low, just like a classic kind of skateboard video, right? If we just come off of it a little bit though, you can see that the animation is basically that kind of jump pattern. It's fast out, it eases at the top, and then it comes back down. And then there's a little bit of overlapping action. And that's where you can get into some more advanced layering of your animation and going deeper into animation principles. But it really is about understanding that kind of core fundamental approach. And so here in Maxon Cinema 4D, which is the most common 3D application for motion designers, and it's just incredibly user-friendly. I'm here in R25 after the big redesign, actually. But we can see here that this same idea that we were just looking at in Adobe After Effects is also represented here, right? We see a graph curve corresponding to the X position of this object here. And it does the same kind of thing, right? Because all computer animation is built on this idea of the computer will fill in the in-between frames, and you're going to use these graphs and mold these graph curves to determine the distribution of those frames. So we can see here at this starting point, if we ease this further, look at all those points pull in like an accordion, right? Just like Adobe After Effects, where we'll say, we're going to start really, really slowly. So we're going to pull all those points, and we're going to see that's just going to pull points right from the center. And let's ease in to this side. And so we're going to see all those points pulled together there. So just like in 2D, just like in Adobe After Effects, here in Cinema 4D, it's very often the same kind of thing, right? The goal of an animator is to make sure we make interesting, appealing, dynamic animation. And so whether I'm working in Adobe After Effects or I'm working in Cinema 4D, it's really the same idea, right? Of the distribution of the frames and using and understanding these graph editor curves in the goal of having the computer distribute these frames and do what's called interpolation is the technical name for it, but it just means it's placements of all these frames in between. So for a shot like this, if we actually take a look at some of the curves, because I also had to do the kind of skateboard jump, as we just actually go through any of these curves, let's see, this rotation, right? We get this same thing over and over again, right? Ease in, ease out patterns, jump patterns, and you can see that it's really just a lot of layering and different individual layers, but all these patterns are the same, right? And all of this just basically kind of gets weaved together to create a more complex animation. So, you know, when I'm teaching people to use After Effects or Cinema 4D and to understand animation, I really just try to hammer home that core fundamental concept of, you know, relating the in-betweening to these graphs, and then just thinking about interesting spacing, right? Finding dynamic, interesting spacing, which there's really not that many options, right? It's really then about layering and creating more of a context for the animation, right? Like the animation side of it is simple, and animation is really simple. You know, I teach animation and design, and I very often, you know, will tell people animation is the easy part of it. The hard part is visual art and design. You know, the traditional visual development and illustration and all those other things. So animation should be one of those ideas that kind of once you see that workflow and once you understand what's going on, you can say, okay, actually, this isn't that complicated. It's just, you know, understanding what you're looking for, that basic idea, and then just the repetition of practicing and kind of getting that muscle memory, and then really just learning the software as well. And so that's why, you know, with Mograph Mentor, we offer a more affordable monthly subscription to the technical training, because, right, you can teach somebody the concept of animation in like 30 minutes, and then it's about using the software over and over and practicing and doing lots of projects and thinking about all the different contexts and ways that animation can get merged together and combined, at least in terms of trying to be a professional motion designer. But if your goal is just to understand animation, and even, like we said, to do web animation, you know, Lottie integration now, there's definitely a lot more requests for people in my field to be, you know, building web experiences, right? The same principles apply. The same idea around spacing is going to apply. And so I want to also share with you this example here. And let me go ahead and turn off some of these top layers. So my goal here was to animate a sheet of paper blowing in the wind, kind of twisting and twirling. And so the very first thing I did to create this animation was to come into Adobe Animate. And this is a software that I really love. It's very, very simple. But basically, it's a vector-based frame-by-frame animation tool. So when you want to do production animation, especially if you're an After Effects user, this is really the kind of industry standard as well for doing this specific kind of work. But the very first thing I did was draw the path guide and then add, again, a spacing chart, right? Just to give myself an idea of where the animation was going to be slow and where it was going to be fast. And so I can use that reference, use that guide to come in and create an animation like this, where I draw on each frame. Let me go ahead and loop this. Where I get to draw on each of these frames and follow that path, and get to, you know, and this for me is the really fun part of animation, is getting to do this kind of work. And just that basic idea of spacing, right? So I'm kind of like easing into this top arc, then I'm going fast, then I ease through this sheet of paper, rotating over, and then I go fast again, and then slow again. And so if I actually select all of these frames, let's see, all frames. Have to unlock it. You can see the entire animation, all of the drawings that were done to create this animation. And you can see I didn't stick with my original spacing chart, but again, this is just the same kind of patterns, right? Here, the frames are close together, so I'm easing up into the top of this arc, and then I'm easing out of this arc, easing out down into this part of the animation where it goes fast, right? Look at the gap between this drawing, and this drawing, right? Between three drawings, covered 40% of the screen, as opposed to the moments right before it where there's 5 drawings here ish, and they're all close together. So it's really these moments that you're looking for as an animator, and this is what is appealing and delightful about animation, is these flourishes and changes of pace and contrast. And so here in this animation, then you can see get slow again in here. So we're going, ease in, ease out. And then again, starts to ease, goes fast through here, and eases into the next pose. So like I said, 90% of it being ease in, ease out, it is that pattern over and over and over. So even if I'm using 3 ease in, ease outs on this one paper flight, it's just that same thing over and over again, kind of easing in, easing out from one part of the animation to the next. And I'm not totally stopping it in terms of the drawing, but it really is that simple. So animation as an idea, as a concept, is super simple. That people who really want to get into it, it's really just about learning to draw better if you want to do this kind of work, or learning to use software like Adobe After Effects or like Maxon Cinema 4D to do other types of work as well, and then character design, character rigging, all these various kind of things, is basically why I wanted to put Mograph Mentor together, was to basically give people access to the training, right? It really is the art and the technology to do this kind of work. So we offer mentorships that are for people who really want to do it professionally as a motion designer, and they want to spend that larger amount of money to really have hands-on training and learn to take this animation idea to a much deeper level, a much more complex, production ready level, or people who just want to just learn about the software, right? Like if you're just very self-driven and you're great at just kind of managing your own time and guiding yourself through on-demand educational stuff, then we offer a pretty big library of training there as well. And we're just trying to make it cheap. And we know there's people all over the world. It's such a great time to be doing this kind of work, where there's so many opportunities to be applying this trade. And then, it matters less and less where you're located. So, if you can get your hands on a computer, and even like free YouTube tutorials and, options like us at Mograph Mentor and other places, then, it's just an absolutely awesome field to be working in. And I'm so grateful to have had the chance to do it. So just remember, price of admission is right here. Just, if you just can really internalize this basic idea, and I know it probably sounds like I'm hammering it pretty hard, but this is, the distilled version of animation is actually really simple, and it's really repetitive actually. But there's all kinds of creative use cases and ways that you can take advantage of this idea, whether it's in motion design or whether it's in something like a web user interface, and all that kind of cool stuff. So that is basically my hard sell on animation being easy. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And yeah, thank you to everybody who hung out and wanted to talk about animation today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. It's really, it's fascinating. I think both from a complete novice perspective, just to see the way that you've broken things down in simple steps, right? In its simplest form. You have these 3 different types of movement. This is how the visual is created, which feels very accessible, but then also for people who are interested in creating versions of that in their own work, being able to articulate the way that you did, how those are the building blocks for these other kind of more complex worlds that you can build. Yeah. So I so appreciate just the way that you're able to capture both these like super fundamental building blocks, but then also the the nuanced ways that those simple building blocks turn into these very complex ecosystems and um, visual art.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of questions. One, I would love to just kind of start with you sharing a little bit about some of the different, like the menu of course options and mentorship, just for our audience who may be watching now or who may be tuning in later and
Sure.
thinking, okay, well, so I'm kind of a beginner at this right now. What might be good for me to explore versus, I've got the basics down, but I'm really looking to kind of stretch in different directions. Can you just share a little bit about the types of mentorship that you guys offer?
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about the mentorships. We currently offer 3 main mentorships, and there's a little bit of a price disparity because the price is about to go up, actually. But for people who are here and taking advantage of the promotion that Discover's doing, you're gonna pay less than the number you see here on the screen.
I just
But
dropped the link in the chat there for everybody.
the first one is called Introduction to 2D Animation and After Effects, and it's 9 weeks of more in-depth video training. This is for individuals who really want to get serious about using After Effects, like being a power user of After Effects. You've got like a really good reason, whether you're in video and you're really going to be adding hardcore 2D components, or you're really trying to make a career as a motion designer. You're going to make After Effects your main tool to get booked and to do freelance or to do it professionally at your company. So this is our most popular one, and it is because After Effects is such a great tool. And so it's very similar to the discussion we had today around understanding the distilled idea of what animation is, but then really how do you make like beautiful arts and great motion by taking that simple idea and kind of applying it. And the second one that we have is called 2D Art Direction and Creative Production, and this is for people who are definitely more experienced. They definitely feel comfortable with After Effects and various production techniques, but they want to sell more work to clients, or they are already an art director at their studio and they want to create better looking work and really just like go deep on the multidisciplinary nature of how graphic design and how illustration and how filmmaking drive great motion design in a really specific kind of advertising and production context. And so we've got some really brilliant mentors who love to work with individuals. That's usually people who are in our field and are pretty experienced already. And then we offer an advanced 3D filmmaking class. This is definitely for people who are already well acquainted with Cinema 4D and want to be better 3D filmmakers. And we've got some really awesome mentors who teach that one.
So this is where I go when I'm ready to like do a WALL-E sequel, like Pixar level kind of stuff. I'm like
more
ready
like you're
to go.
more like you're gonna direct a Sony ad or a Nike ad. It's more advertising. Yeah. Oh, excuse me.
No, yeah. I am. So I mentioned a little bit before we got started, but prior to the work I'm doing now, I was working at TED on the TED Ed team, which is very animation based. We make, sort of like short animated versions of TED Talks. And it blew my mind how much preparation, design, different elements go into creating even a shorter piece of animation. And since then, what I've learned about how you kind of build into these bigger productions, it's really quite phenomenal to me that any kind of like a full-length feature film is ever able to be made, because I'm like,
yeah, right. I mean, it takes
so long to get the lighting right in.
Yeah. And they really do spend years. I mean, a feature film you see in the theater is probably in development for like 4 years, especially if it's animated.
Right.
And you're right. And I mean, the term motion graphics is so tough because it is multidisciplinary. Like the biggest pain point for a lot of motion graphics people is they'll get contacted by a great company like TED to like do a film, and they'll often be expected to like be able to design and illustrate and like lay out art in a really great way that also is like rooted in like good film theory and flow and all these other things, and then animate everything. And so it's just so much work. You're right. It's so much work to do stuff like that. But
I would imagine it being a very, you know, in most disciplines, there is some element of people outside of your field not really understanding what it takes to create what you create, you know, whatever your field is, if you're a marketer or a scientist, whatever. But in animation, especially, since there are so many folks who are developing content that, you know, that is either contracted or you know, like paid for by other brands or what have you, like the amount of time that motion graphic designers or animators spend being like, okay, let me see if I can adjust expectations about how long what you're asking for is actually going to take.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's never enough people who do this work is the crazy thing. And because I do Mograph Mentor, I'm particularly connected to people being like, hey, do you have someone for X, Y, or Z? And so, of course, I'm always trying to like, you know, funnel recommendations, but it's never enough.
The dots.
And emerging because everybody's got, you know, first of all, there's like the everybody needs a video part of just like everyone's communicating through media. And so every company, small, medium, and large, you know, they're speaking to the world through moving media. And it's super international. I mean, you see people building great companies all over the world serving this need, even as billions more will come online, and, you know, the digital, you know, expanse just gets more and more inclusive, and like it's here to stay. I mean, we got a long way to go of like more of these skills being applied, and so much content will be made right over the next 10 years. Too much. We know it's too much. We know
it's too much, but but also so much of it is really great. You know, and I think we're in your field, the ability to kind of stay at the cutting edge of how people are learning information, how they're absorbing information, you know, the ability for animated graphics or you know, motion graphics, animation to capture people's attention in a world where so much video content is vying for that attention. It's kind of in addition to being this sort of classically beautiful art form based in you know, this sort of much older tradition, there's also this element of it that's like super cutting edge, and why you can, you know, grab people's attention with motion graphics in a way that you might not be able to with like standard recorded video.
Yep. And it's like, and the core fundamental principles will be relevant no matter whether we're in the metaverse and we're like VR, and we're designing brand standards for companies in a totally new way. In 10 years, it'll still be like things easing in and out, and it'll still be like the fundamentals of art. And like, so I think, so that's always been our thesis, is like the thing that will make you relevant. Because it's like very scary for people too, that the software will change so quick, and even like one version to the next. Even with Cinema 4D, they just came out with release 25, and they like fully redesigned the interface, and people on Twitter went nuts because we had just spent like 15 years learning this software in and out, and the buttons were in a specific place, and they really redesigned it, and people really flipped because they spend their whole day in it, and their brain is like, what, where is this here? Like, but
I go nuts when Google Chrome gives me a new homepage profile. I'm like, what have you done? I can't even imagine how.
Right. It's all that to say, just the software changes so quickly. So it's easy to get antiquated like super quick. You just have to keep learning learning the new things, but like, right, having those core principles are the only way to future-proof yourself as a production artist. If in
Right.
that specific kind of work, even a lot of the simple stuff that After Effects does is like pieces of web software can spit out now, and it's just like even Google with their whole motion brand standards, and a lot of stuff's even in motion, and that's why we really try to encourage context for your skills and like some of the art fundamentals around your skills too, so using them in specific ways, because right, if you can just do one circle back and forth, then right, that's not very valuable.
Right.
It's really more, right, can you, like we say, multidisciplinary, can you pull multiple things together? And even when art schools teach this kind of stuff, sometimes the major can be called motion media, mixed media, communications arts and mixed media, and like these kind of labeling. But it's good because the art schools are trying to position people to be really art fundamentals and skills based, and like, well, whatever the technology does, whether you're doing motion capture and VR or you're doing this kind of work here, the last job,
The skills.
it's translatable, is a good way to put it.
Well, we're about out of time, and I so appreciate this. Honestly, this sort of unexpected turn that this session took for me is I hadn't been thinking about the ways in which, so an educator and have worked with students for much of my career, and get asked all the time for recommendations for different programs, and thinking about what you were just saying about how this industry, this field has so many opportunities to be at at a future-proof, cutting-edge space in terms of how to keep yourself and your skills relevant professionally. I know that you're working a lot with adult learners and folks who are maybe shifting, developing new skills or shifting industries or what have you. But it's also, I'm now thinking about this in terms of like, oh man, what an exciting industry to be a part of, right? Getting to explore this like artistic fundamentals, but in a way that can be relevant, across disciplines, regardless of which turns innovation take. So really excited to kind of have that captured here. And for our audience, I will also probably send this to a handful of former students of mine.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would love to finish out. What's like, and maybe it's a specific recent project, or maybe it's just a kind of generalized response that you have for this, but what's a type of project that you get really excited about? Like what are the elements of something that you're like, oh yes, let me add it?
That I personally get excited about for my own career. Let's see. Let's see if I can pull open something. I had some interesting I really love 3D. I really love particle systems and kind of photoreal 3D attempts. This is a tool that I hadn't used in a long time that I was recently picking up, and I do remember how much I love, called X Particles, which is a kind of simulation engine. And I was doing some film work with a buddy where we were doing these this kind of series of abstract pieces, and I'm also using this really fantastic tool that isn't new. Let's see. Where you can do kind of like plant simulations. So it's a little hard to see here, but this is like a tree blowing in the wind and emitting I see kind of like these particles. And so this stuff I absolutely love. And 3D is such a sandbox. You can create anything and everything. And make weird things that look real. And
Yeah.
I have a great love of film and photography. So, the lighting aspect of 3D, it's awesome because you're getting to place everything and determining the size of your lights and the color temperature of your lights, and, get to play photography really in 3D. And doing any kind of simulation work too is just like, we said incredible time to be alive. It's like, I just cannot believe that I can do basically like a simulation of how an electron sparks into reality. And like, there's real math, there's like real math to back up what's happening in the software. And then you actually look at the document, the underlying file, the Cinema 4D file, and it's just like a string of ones and zeros.
Yeah.
I don't even understand how it's possible, but the incredible thing about 3D is getting to apply some math and some scripting, but really simulate the world, simulate gravity and wind and all these things. And you're just like a kid playing, with things. And so
it's like this sandbox on steroids, just like imagination running wild in all different directions and with all these different tools at your disposal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, I am so grateful for your time today, Michael. Really appreciate what you are sharing with us, and the amount of mentorship and accessibility that Mographic provides for folks who are breaking into this space or really kind of challenging themselves to grow in this space. So thanks so much. Definitely encourage the audience to check out Michael's course, which is pinned to the top of the YouTube page. I also dropped it here in the chat window. Like I mentioned, we'll have a replay available, so you'll get to, rewind back and make sure that you're capturing all of those elements, the foundational elements that Michael mentioned, and being able to take notes on all of the wisdom that he shared.
Hopefully helpful. Hopefully it was helpful in some way.
I think it is for sure. So thank you, Michael, so much for being here. Audience, thank you for joining us. Excited to see what everybody animates and all the graphics that you give motion to put out into the world.
That is what we do. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley. That was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.